A limited liability company is important when conducting a business because it protects your personal assets in the event the business gets sued. If you don't form an LLC and you conduct your business by yourself with no formal legal structure, then you have what's called a sole proprietorship. And in a lawsuit with respect to a sole proprietorship, the sole proprietor's personal assets are all at risk. Whereas in a lawsuit versus a limited liability company, the only assets that are at risk are those that are owned by the limited liability company. So that limited liability company serves as an important shield from your business and from your personal life. Without it, your entire savings and wealth that you've accumulated could potentially be at risk if the business goes through some sort of lawsuit. So it's important to create an LLC to protect against that um, risk. Now, the LLC only works if it's operated properly. There's a concept in law called piercing the corporate veil. And if that occurs, that allows the creditor of the company to disregard the limited liability protection that the LLC affords, meaning they could then go after the business owner's personal assets. Now, what typically courts will take into account several factors when determining whether or not a corporate veil should be pierced for an LLC, a corporation, limited partnership, whatever the case may be. And that typically arises when the member of the LLC does not treat it as a separate entity apart and distinct from the LLC member. So that means an LLC must have its own bank account. It must keep separate books and records. It can't be sharing expenses with the business owner slash member. Everything for that business has to be kept separate from the LLC's business and from the member's personal business. If there's commingling of the two, then that potential possibility exists for the corporate veil to be pierced. So it's very important that the LLC member treat that business as a separate entity so it provides the protection that is afforded to them. Piercing the corporate veil is a concept in the law that allows a creditor of a organized entity that provides protection to disregard the protection the entity provides. So in this case, an LLC protects the members of the LLC, their personal assets from lawsuits arising with respect to the business. If the corporate veil is pierced, then those personal assets of the member are at risk in that lawsuit involving the business. And therefore, the business becomes essentially worthless. Now, when making a determination as to whether or not the corporate veil should be pierced, the courts typically consider a number of factors. Again, the primary consideration most courts take into account is whether or not that business is separate from the member's personal affairs. If there's a lot of commingling of assets, paying of expenses from the business owner's personal account, for business expenses, the business paying personal expenses of the member. Those things are facts that can allow a court to pierce the corporate veil. In my experience, that's the most important factors, but there are several other factors that may be considered that are somewhat similar along those same lines. So, in order to avoid having the corporate veil pierced, the members need to keep that LLC separate from their personal matters. Insurance is always your first line of defense when it comes to any sort of lawsuit. So, what I tell our clients is I'm not an insurance agent, so I can't make recommendations on what's appropriate for your situation. But generally speaking, the more insurance you can buy at a reasonable price, the better you're going to be protected. The reason for that is when suing a company Insurance is always the easiest thing for a lawyer to collect money from. And typically, after they collect whatever they're going to get from the insurance company, any sort of extrajudicial collection means becomes expensive because it involves court filings, trying to locate assets. So, the most efficient way for that creditor's lawyer to get the creditor paid and themselves paid is through that insurance policy. That's why you should speak to your insurance agent to determine what type of coverage they need and what type of policies are appropriate for the client's line of business. In creating LLCs, there can be techniques that are utilized when you have valuable assets and things that have inherent value that are used in the business. So, for example, if you have a warehouse which a manufacturing company uses in its production, you don't want the warehouse and the manufacturing company owned by the same LLC, because if there's a potential issue in manufacturing a product for that company, then the warehouse is going to be at risk in that lawsuit. So in that scenario, you'd want to create a separate LLC that owns the warehouse and subsequently leases it back to the manufacturing company. Now, if there's a lawsuit against the manufacturing company, the warehouse is protected from any claim that exists. So it's important to consider that when you are dealing with valuable assets that are used in your business. Now, it may not be just real estate, it could be intellectual property, patents, copyrights, trademarks. So anything of inherent value should be separated apart from the operating business to provide more protection. One of the questions I'll get asked a bunch is, should I put my personal residence into an LLC? And my advice to clients when this question is asked is not to do that. And the reason for that is, one, it doesn't give you any additional protection because there's no business purpose. That home is your personal residence, and there's no business purpose for an LLC to own it. So therefore, it's not going to provide protection for you in the event of any lawsuit. And then secondly, if the home, your personal residence, is transferred into an LLC, you lose your homestead exemption under Arizona law. So your homestead exemption allows you to protect up to the first $250,000 of equity in the home in the event that you declare bankruptcy. However, if that personal residence is owned by an LLC, you're not entitled to that exemption. So if you do declare bankruptcy, you lose that protection. It's important that you give us a call so we can sit down with you and talk about the assets used in your business and how we can structure your business, and if that means forming more than one LLC to protect valuable real estate, patents, trademarks, and other intellectual property, then we can help you do that. So feel free to give us a call. Happy to meet with you and discuss those issues.